Well, hello again, and we have another watercolor demo here today. Um, and I've titled it Painting a Complex Landscape. And when I looked at this photo, which I took just a couple weeks ago, I was real excited by the light and I really liked it. But it is a really hard subject in watercolor. And I thought I would focus on that aspect of how to deal with something like that. And I was really going to spend more time on the drawing, and because that's so important when you're dealing, in representational watercolor, to have a good drawing. And I started from scratch with the video, and you couldn't see any of my lines, and so not until later. So I've just cut out big sections, and here we are, getting to the end of the drawing. And but what you do notice in the drawing is that the lines there's some variation in the darkness. Some are light, some are really much darker and heavier and thinner. Some are thinner, some are heavier, and that's really important because you don't want to lose this drawing, especially when you have something really difficult with lots of complex shapes and overlapping and spaces. You have aerial perspective. You're moving back into space. You have really high contrast edges and then more subtle things. So the drawing is really important, and you need to spend that time to get all that information in there. Notice too that I have some shading on some of the shapes, and so that helps to remind me to make sure that I get a dark enough value. So moving forward here, the palette, I've just like the last video, I've just taken the palette, setting it on the painting. I think that's easier for me to video it. And these are these early washes, and you notice they're real clean, bright colors, and that sets the tone. This is a really a subject that's very light filled. There's a lot of like clean, bright colors, and it's very sunny. And so, these early washes that I'm putting down are so critical to establishing sort of the color tonality of the piece, as opposed to if I got, maybe too conservative and I put down grayer versions of these colors, and I thought, well, I'll just build up to the brighter colors. You really can't build color necessarily. You certainly can build value, but it's hard to build color. I mean, color has to come from underneath. And so, if it's going to be a cool or a warm, it's, you got to get those nice bright colors underneath. And so this early wet into wet, I think, really, is the idea behind it, of establishing really how we're going to go forward for the rest of the painting. And so these are, pretty much my standard colors that I've been using in a lot of these. It's, a lot of mostly primary palette, a lot of cobalt blue, quin red, and then the additions of like quin burnt orange and quin gold seem to dominate, most of the mixes. At the end here, you see me picking up some of the excess paint and trying to lighten some of these things. So there's the quin gold and manganese blue make a really beautiful green, and so that's especially for these are hemlocks that are along this stream, and so that seems to make a really nice warm yellow-based green, almost like a brighter olive. And so, for the second pass, you can see the colors are still pretty clean and bright. A lot of this painting is really done with two brushes for the most part. This is a half-inch black velvet flat, and those black velvets are really nice. They're squirrel hair and synthetic, and they hold a lot of paint. And one of the things I want you to notice too is how the application is put down, that the brush angle. Lots of times you'll see the brush, I'll have it almost parallel to the picture plane as I'm just sort of pushing the paint in. Other times it's more of a traditional brush stroke. The pushing of the brush really does give me a lot of broken edges. And in this subject, there are lots of broken edges and lots of edges in general. And that's one of the things that makes this painting difficult, is that there are so many transitions that are hard transitions because of the sun. It's a sunny day, there's no real atmospheric effect going on. we have cools up against warms, and that puts a lot of pressure on us to control these edges and to control shapes, and so in this case, because there's so many broken edges, perhaps a little drier application is in order, and that's what you're seeing in some of these brush strokes. So I've tried to take a few sections of this painting and blow it up so that you could see some of that application. So you can see how low the brush angle is to the paper here. And I'm just sort of, the brush holds a lot of paint. That's what, it really does make a difference to have a good brush that will hold paint. I just heard this expression, it's the magician and not the wand, meaning that, the artist, you can have all the best brushes, but you still have to, be able to handle it. And that's true, but I think, it is important to have good materials. And this is not a real expensive brush. The black velvets are not real expensive, but they're really, I think, a wonderful, addition to your supplies if you haven't ever tried this type of brush. And so, but this 1/2 inch, I use it a lot for all these edges. And a lot of these broken, the pine trees and where the scrub is down on the ground. And so this painting, I went through these sort of peaks and valleys with this. I did this alone in the studio, and at certain points, I don't know, I just wasn't feeling good about this painting. There's very, one side is very different than the other side, and so I just put my head down and just kept painting and thought, well, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, oh well. And eventually, I'm pretty happy with the outcome. There's a lot of negative painting in this also, and which makes it tricky. And I've slowed this part down to real time so that you can see, these videos that are compressed. I mean, this video is like 24, 25 minutes long, maybe. It's not a realistic depiction as far as the process, as far as how thoughtful and slow, watercolor painting can be. And so I wanted to slow down, and so you can see that, especially when you're doing these negative painting where I'm introducing the water, I'm also creating these the shrubs or bushes that are along the bank here. And so I have to really take my time and look at the subject, go back, add a little bit, pause, you look back. It's a really, this is what draws the painting out. I mean, but we can't, for the sake of time, I have to keep compressing it and cutting out sections. But I wanted you to see sort of the real slow process of just loading the brush, putting in a small area, load the brush, put in the next section, and be looking, and I'm constantly looking at the shapes that I'm creating by doing that. When you are negative painting like this, it really does help not to necessarily be focusing on what you're painting, but be focusing on what you're not painting and what you're leaving behind. And in this case, it was these weeds or bushes along the side. And so what I'll do is I'll squint when I'm picking along these edges and just trying to see what shapes am I creating. And that seems to help some. This whole area, that whole water is all cobalt blue, and cobalt blue and manganese, ultramarine, a little bit of phthalo for the darks, but a lot of manganese or a lot of cobalt blue in this. The shadow that's going in, the shadow that's coming across the water there, as soon as I put the shape in, I'm like, oh boy, it seems a little heavy. It actually is a little awkward looking to me, a little awkward to the shape. And so it's in, so you just go forward. And, but that's part of, as I'm painting, I'm thinking, oh boy, I made a mistake here, or this isn't quite what I wanted. And then I go back and I double down on it with this dark, because it has to have a certain weight. And when I did that, I'm like, oh geez. And so you see, I go back and I start picking up some of this, and I dried it, I let it dry a little bit, and then I started going and lifting some of this color off to try to get a more pleasing shape and to It has to be there. There is a shadow shape there, but I don't think it's quite as strong as I've painted it. But looking back, I think what that is is a reaction to trying to link that right side to the left side. And that was a constant that as I'm working, I said, I got to make this connection. I got to tie these two pieces together. And so I think probably subconsciously, maybe that's why I created that shape so much darker. I'm not sure. But, and you'll see as the painting goes on that is repeated, that idea of like trying to find like these little darks that I'm putting over on the other side. I'm looking at the photo, but after a while, when you work from a photo, your painting really takes on a life of its own. And once all these big shapes are in, then you're kind of, the painting's dictating to you what it needs. And so there I'm again pulling these darks over there because the right side is going to get really dark. Those trees up on the right are going to get much darker. And so these little pockets of darker shapes, I think, really do help. And this is you don't see this, but this was a painting where there were lots of pauses because I'm painting mostly dry, or wet on dry, and so the paper's not pre-wet. I don't have I'm working in smaller shapes, and so I can basically take time to look and try to get a feel for, especially if a painting is tricky and I'm not feeling super confident about it. I mean, you can see there's just so many hard edge shapes here, and to try to control the value and to make it work as a complete painting is really, I think, really tough. And some subjects I'm always taking pictures, or I paint plein air, and I'll see something that looks really great, and I'll think, I don't even want to tackle that. I don't know if I have the emotional energy right now to even deal with something like that. And it's often on these sunny days like that. I mean, you see these beautiful things, but they're tough. I mean, an easier painting are these gray, rainy, soft focus days. I mean, you see tons of paintings out there of that. And most of that kind of process is additive. You put a wash in the background, you add another darker color, and then you let that dry, and you add another one, and figures on a street or buildings, and it's much easier, much more relaxed process, and much more predictable. These sunny day paintings, I think, are, for me, are a lot tougher. And so I'm doing this right now after lunch. I took a break, let the painting dry, went and ate lunch, came back, and I wasn't real confident that this was all going to work out as to what I was thinking I was going to do. And so, but I made a decision that it really needs these really strong values. They're in there. They're in the subject and in the reference. And so I mixed up a big batch of that dark values. Lots of values that go from a dark brown to a blue, and even almost a violet. And so again, this is in real time, and so you see just the slow process of picking shapes. Looking and then saying, okay, a little bit more here, a little bit more there. And so once I started committing to these darks, I started feeling better about the painting. I started to think, okay, you know what, this can work. I think this can work. And again, it's all about linking that one side. So you see, I spent a lot of time in between, right on that edge, right where I am now, trying to find the visual connection to sort of bounce your eye back from one side to the other. And I go back and I make that shadow even darker. I mean, it's sort of comical when I look at it now to think, but I think it does. It's okay. It works, and so I'm not upset about it. This is that's the best scratch I've made in a while. Did you see that where I scratched down through a tree? I really like that one long fingernail scratch right through that tree. And that's all timing, so I timed it well there, I guess. This is the other brush that I'm using a ton in this, and you'll see it. It has a red mark on it, and it's a number 6 round. And it's made by a company out of Germany called Kremer Pigments, and They do have a store in New York City, and you can order online through that store. And this brush was recommended, or this company was recommended to me by a friend, and I bought a couple brushes, and this one is really great. And it's it's just a round, but it's got a nice body to it, and the material, I guess, is synthetic. I mean, it's not a squirrel hair brush or anything like that, but it really does hold the paint for a long time. It really loads up, and I can get fine lines, but because of the body of the brush seems to be, it doesn't taper real quickly. It seems to carry a lot more paint, and so and it's not an expensive brush. I mean, it's quite a surprise, when you buy that. If you notice around the white reflections, where the sun's hitting the water, I zoomed in there, and you could see just a little hint of almost a pink along the edges between the blue and the white shape. And that is just pyrrole scarlet, and it's just really diluted, and that gives you that kind of glow on the water where the sun is reflecting off of the water. And little things like that I think are really important, especially when you're doing light effects like that, and sunny light effects. I think that's really important to have. Sometimes those little accents, they sometimes will refer to that as rimming, where you just rim the edge of like almost a halo around a highlight, and that really does look really nice. As I'm building down through here with all these darks, that's a mixture that is not real watery, and that's really the key to getting these deep values. If you're always watering down and that all your washes are very watery, then they'll dry lighter, and you'll have to layer more. And I've done that in some paintings where the paper works better with thinner, but this is 300-pound arches cold press, and it really does well with the thicker applications of paint. And it's not thick like impasto, but certainly less water, and so you don't get a lot of value shifting as it dries. And so because I know in those sections I need it to get really dark, then that really dictated some of the later applications in the deepest shadows. And again, more scratching can be really effective. They're real, can be real subtle marks. The only downside is that they're permanent marks. But I focused here. I like that tree. See how it goes from brown to blue to almost a pink. And it's actually like that because that's going all the way back to that original wet into wet wash that we put in. If you recall, there's that big surge of blue that comes down through that corner on the right side. And I really like that tree has a little bit of variety to it. I believe I hit that tree again with another wash and make it darker, but that variety stays. And that's really important too, put your color variety in early, and it simplifies your process. Then you can paint with single mixes as you're layering, and that variety is still going to come up through. So you're not having to come up with these magical mixes all the time. Once you start early with these variegated washes and establish a nice color variety, bright colors underneath, you can make a painting grayer, you can make a painting cooler, but you can't make it brighter or warmer without getting really opaque. And sometimes when you get too opaque, obviously it gets muddy, and that's where you get mud. And especially when you're, in here where we have real distinct temperature shifts. And so if you're in a cool area and you start overlaying warm, that's a recipe for mud, a recipe for dead color. And so if you stay within the temperature family, you can layer and layer, almost endlessly, and still maintain some color and some clarity to the intensity. So these last darks, they're small, they're small pieces, but boy, are they important to tie this painting together, to tie those really bold, contrasted, snow-covered rocks and boulders along the shore, to cover to connect those back to the water. I purposely made the water darker than it is in the reference. I think that's all part of that idea that, okay, I just have to really go for this as far as value is concerned. And looking back, it's, I'm like, oh, I'm really happy I did that. But so here I also, focus again on this negative painting, and what I'm painting around there are some just scratches, some leftover, negative painting from before, and just picking my spots. And again, it looks really fast, but it's not a fast process. It's just really slow, and just, picking where I need a shadow or something. Then I switched over to opaque for these final touches, and that's white gouache mixed with various, yellows, the gamboge, sometimes quin gold. In this case, of just a green. And I'm still, I'm trying to get as much light, as much sparkle out of this painting as I can, because that's really what, I'm feeling here. And so, there was these limbs cutting across the dark pines, and so putting some of those in, then mixing, the orange colors that you see, that's cat orange mixed with white. The blue, there's little touches of cobalt blue with white gouache. And again, those are just those little, just accents that I think really add to the energy of the piece. And I like it. I like having little passages of opaque color against transparent color. Again, I've mentioned this before, but you go back to Sargent and Zorn and all those guys, and they had some really nice of these passages. This is really important. That little corner there's a shadow from that tree, and I had painted that out, and so I went and reintroduced that light, put a little snow on the back shore, and then here hitting that tree again, trying to just constantly adjust these values. So I'm signing the painting here. I'm thinking I'm done, and then I'm sitting, looking at it, and next thing you know, I'm back painting. I'm putting in more leaves, more limbs, more rocks. So that's kind of funny. When I sign a painting, that usually really does signify that I'm done here. I zoomed in here. This is that little last piece of little dark that I'm still battling. I'm still trying to pull your eye over. And so I've gone in and I've accentuated this one mark. And then the last thing was, I thought that violet was too strong. And so I went and I took a diluted wash of white gouache and just floated it through. And that's the last step of the painting. And as it dried down, it's real subtly a little less vibrant, but I think that does help to give this sense of space. So I thank you for tuning in and watching. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe so you can see the next video, and share this with your friends. And I hope to see you again. Thank you. Thanks for watching.